the power, yep. Yeah, I got all the power.
Meet Aperture's first ever tube light, the MT Pro. 36 pixels in 1 foot, with CRMX in any color. Unleash your creativity with one or many. Leading the industry in pixel density, the MT Pro produces ultra-smooth chases and effects unmatched by any other light.
It's time to change the way we think about lighting. Introducing the new Anglerfish series from iFootage. Boasting cutting-edge color reproduction without sacrificing portability, the Anglerfish series makes cinematic lighting more accessible than ever. The Anglerfish series utilizes a bespoke construction and a new one-of-a-kind LED element to recreate the full spectrum of the sun with unbeaten accuracy. This unique LED element recreates the full daylight spectrum, but without the blue peak that's typically found in even the top studio lighting products.
My eye on the dance floor, eye on the door. Hey, a DJ, you like the way I sway? I gotta get it.
Lady, go!
1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go, yeah, you're gonna shut up. Battle your battles, you gotta tell it how to the cure. If it's trash, yeah, you're gonna take it out. Handle it rapidly, got the magic, you got it for sure. You can see what's in your jar. Alpha.
Meet Swit's latest RGBW panel innovations, the Van Gogh 70 and Van Gogh 100 LED panels. The Van Gogh series uses exclusive edge-mounted RGBW SMD LEDs, which results in an extremely thin 21mm LED panel that is fanless, making zero noise on set. Time division drive technology makes Van Gogh up to 60% brighter than its competitors in RGB mode. You can count on extreme color accuracy with a very high CRI and TLCI. Thinner, lighter, brighter, and quieter. These are the Van Gogh Ultra Slim RGBW panels by Swit.
Alpha.
Hello everyone, welcome to ProAV Live. Thank you very much for joining us for what we hope is the first one of a regular series that we're going to start doing on this channel, and potentially as an audio podcast and everything. So if you are listening to this through the means of audio only in the future, we made it, but great. If you're not and you're just watching this as a live stream or on YouTube, of course that's business as usual, but we're planning to do this monthly. So each month we're going to sit down, look back at the month so far, so this month January, and chat it through, talk to any new product releases, answer any questions that your viewers may have, and just sit down as a tech team and have a good old nerdy chat is the idea. I'm joined, of course, by the one and only Richard Payne. How are you, Richard?
Absolutely fine, thank you very much.
Absolutely fine. And I'm joined, but for the first time, by Luke Curtis. How you doing, Luke?
I'm very well, thank you, Carl. Yeah, glad to be here, mate.
Welcome to the team.
Appreciate it.
So for everyone watching, Luke has joined us. Well, why don't you explain your role rather than me trying to talk it through?
Thank you. I've recently joined from heading up the European marketing operation from Nanlite, so people may be familiar with me from that role. I've left them and I'm now here at ProAV, and my role is brand manager for lighting. So basically kind of putting us on the map in terms of how we proposition our lighting, and also here to answer all the nerdy lighting questions that we do get from time to time.
I mean, I thought I knew a decent amount about lights, and then I sat down for a day and chatted to Luke and went, okay, all right.
I'll take that as a compliment, thank you.
And of course, mixing us as we go and joining us for any relevant questions, we've got Nathaniel. How are we doing, Nathaniel?
Very well, thank you. Excited for the stream today.
Yeah, it should be good. So, we need to decide on a structure. Who wants to go first? I mean, we've come up... Any questions that people watching this have while live, I can bring up one from Scout Design, by the way, saying looking forward to this. Thank you very much. So I can bring up comments as we go like this. So ask anything that you may have that you want us to talk about as we go, and we'll steer the conversation as needed. Should we start by talking about the big camera launches? Because there have actually been a couple of really big ones to kick off 2023. We've had the Panasonic S5 Mark II, which we actually got to see just before Christmas. In fact, I think you had it over Christmas, Richard.
I did, yep.
And I think is the biggest thing Panasonic have done since the early GH cameras, with the exception of maybe the Eva, which was a big move for them and maybe not to be continued. But well, it's a big deal.
Us older people might remember the AF101.
Yes, there are older cameras too. But you know, the introduction of phase autofocus as a new system to Panasonic changes everything. Because every single conversation I've had with customers about Panasonic for the last 4 years now has literally gone, this is a great camera, but
it's always been the Panasonic elephant in the room.
It really has.
The Panasonic equivalent of Brexit. Let's not mention the autofocus. You know, everything's going to be fine.
Yes.
And suddenly it is.
It is now. I mean, it doesn't just sit on I mean, I've said this 100 times now, but it doesn't just sit on a level playing field with Canon and Sony. There are areas where it outperforms some of them. You know, I think it's really nice to use. I think it's really reliable, and I think I actually put out a video. Was it this week or the week before? I think it was this week. Talking about using EF lenses with it, which was hugely surprising. You know, I haven't. People in the comments were saying that they managed to get it working really nicely with EF lenses through the Sigma adapter on E-mount bodies. I haven't today. I haven't gone back and tested it, but I had tested it a couple of years ago and was struggling with that.
Yeah.
So I need to go back and test whether that works. But for me, it's the first camera platform I've used.
Was it the 24-70 in particular?
We used the 24-70, absolutely. We used the 24-70 Mark II from Canon, which worked beautifully. I tried on a couple of other ones that were here, not to do tests which could go in the video, but I tried the 35 and the 85 1.4, and they worked perfectly fine as well. Maybe not quite as amazing as the 24-70, but good. But of course, it's the thing with EF lenses. Each lens has very different focusing capabilities anyway, so some of them are smoother than others anyway. But yeah, what did you think about the camera after using it for a bit?
I really enjoyed using it. I thought I'd play a cheeky one with a pre-production camera. I said, is this going to anybody over Christmas? And they said no. So I said, is now. and bagged it and took it home. I had a small fight in the office to who took it home. And I took it.
I lost.
I took it home with that wonderful the 24-70 2.8 lens.
Yes, the Lumix one,
yeah,
not the Canon one, yeah.
which is a lovely lens, and I was just amazed that the low light performance was great because it's full frame, of course. Whereas I'd used a lot of Micro Four Thirds Panic cameras, but can't compete in terms of low light. I know it's not the best camera low light, but it's certainly very, very good being a full frame 24 megapixel camera.
You know, it's not going to get headlines for its low light performance, but ordinary cameras nowadays for low light,
they're all blooming good, aren't they?
They're all pretty amazing. I mean, Canon's ones, the R6, the R5, they're amazing. So lots of Sony's ones outside of the ones which are famous for it, like the A7S and the variants of, are pretty amazing. And Panasonic, of course, had the F1H, which is really good in low light. Which you tend to forget about a little bit nowadays, but that's a really good quality sensor in that camera.
It would be great to see that with good autofocus.
Yes. I mean, do we think that's the way that it's going to go.
Well, it's interesting because not only have they brought out the S5 II with good autofocus, but their new PTZs also got phase detect and contrast-based autofocus. So it seems to be a pattern forming for new Panasonic releases, which is very interesting. I mean,
very welcome.
Certainly with a PTZ camera, you'd really want it to have decent autofocus.
And there's not that many PTZ. This is the UE 160 we're talking about.
That's
here.
right, which we'll talk about a bit later in more depth.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was a new release. I mean, it wasn't announced this month, was it? It was, but it's the first time we've played with it.
Yeah, first time we've got a good chance to have a good play with it.
Really, the first time I think that a demo unit has actually made its way into the UK.
Into a UK dealer, yes.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's a nice camera. And I think the addition of face detect autofocus is huge for PTZs, because the whole point of a PTZ is that nobody's operating it. That's why you're using a PTZ.
You don't have to quite, or you've got a single operator operating multiple cameras, and it's hard to hit the focus right with multiple cameras like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So do you think we should wrap up on the S5 III?
Yeah, okay.
I just, from my use, the stills were all sharp. I don't think it missed a beat on stills photography. So I don't think it missed focus on anything I wanted to focus on. And on the video side, again, great codecs, really lovely looking colours, great looking images. So and they were always in focus.
That's the thing.
Who's the customer for it? Like the ideal customer, from someone who's like, I'm not so into my cameras as you guys. Like I have a few cameras. I was previously a stills photographer, but I've been more and more embedded with light, so that's kind of less and less hands on my camera. So who's the ideal customer for that camera?
I think the budget's it's a £2,000 camera, so it's people who may be looking at sort of Super 35 equivalents like the FX30 from Sony. Would you say is on? Or what would be
sort of? I mean, the S5 is unapologetically a hybrid camera.
Yeah.
It's one of these new breed of cameras that it is designed for people, because we all have to do it nowadays. Nobody is exclusively a stills photographer anymore, and nobody is exclusively a videographer, and so hybrid cameras are so important. And FX30 is very much. I mean, it does have stills in it, in inverted commas.
But it's mainly a video camera.
It's very much mainly
what would be the
camera.
Sony equivalent be?
So the Sony equivalent would probably be the A7 Mark IV.
That's a good few £100 more, isn't it?
It is.
So that's really quite good for me. When you say that helps me kind of like ballpark where that camera belongs, and I can kind of understand it a little bit more. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the S5 was Panasonic's entry-level full frame. That was what it was designed to be. But to be honest, with the S5 Mark II, it always punched really well above its weights. The S5 did. Yeah. With the S5 Mark II, they've sort of brought that even more.
Whereas I think with the S5, they added the higher end video features later. They didn't necessarily come with them. You had to wait a while for those firmware updates. But this has come out
a little bit more hindered, didn't it?
Yeah. This has come out firing on all cylinders from a video and a stills perspective.
Oh, wow. It really, really has. I mean, it's a really capable video camera. I think in terms of who'd be looking for it, what kind of customers are going to go with this over maybe the more established ones in the market, like the Sony and the Canon. I mean, if you're a hybrid user, first of all, so that rules out things like the FX30 from Sony or the Blackmagic Pocket cameras, anything like that. And good quality video codecs and options are really important to you, because what Panasonic have always been fantastic at, which the other manufacturers, particularly Canon, to a lesser extent Sony, but Panasonic have always been excellent at, is filling their cameras full of fantastic codec options, giving you full transparency as to whether or not it's all-eye, long GOP, 10-bit, H.264, H.265, 422, 420. All of that stuff is really well laid out, feature-packed, and very obvious in a Panasonic camera, which I really appreciate. I'm a big fan of Canon cameras. We're using exclusively Canon cameras for this at the moment out of choice. I really like Canon cameras. One thing they do that really irritates me is on the mirrorless cameras, like the S5 Mark II level, they don't disclose necessarily what the video codec is. Yeah. Why? I don't know. It could be then sort of Apple-esque mentality of trying to make things seamless for the customers, but it irritates me a bit. I just want
Just
you know,
It actually, listen, as you go through the menu on the S5 II and a lot of other Pana cameras, it tells you exactly the codec in all detail, including
absolutely. And
megabits.
in the Panas, you can filter it. So you can have a nice long list of all your glorified options, but then you can filter it saying, actually, no, only show me the 10-bit ones, only show me the 60p ones. You know, that kind of breakdown, which is really, really cool.
Anamorphic too.
Absolutely. None of those other brands, in terms of their hybrid options, have anamorphic options. This has anamorphic options.
Fantastic.
So for like a mini filmmaker that has to do some stills as well, you know, this
kind of hits everything. Yeah,
absolutely
nice.
No, is it the best camera on the market? Absolutely no. No, it's a. Is
it the best camera for £2,000? I think probably yes.
That's the big thing, isn't it? For that price point, what could you get that's better?
Yeah.
You'll be able to find things that are better in one or two little areas, but across the board, I think it's probably the best option.
Yeah, you'd struggle.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Right, we've had a couple of questions come in. Shall we do these before we get on to the rest of our things? So Scout Designer said, do you think Sony will bring forward a rival to the new low-light Canon chip with 24 stops of dynamic range? We chatted a little bit about this before.
How many? I mean,
I maybe get a bit feisty.
In my 56 years, I've seen so many new sensor innovations which never go on to appear in anything remotely resembling a cinematic camera or a camera like that. They tend to be for industry, for satellites, for monitoring machines that go bing in hospitals. They don't really fit into our sort of world. So I don't think we'll see that very soon in anything with 24 stops of dynamic range.
I don't think we'll see it at all. I think it's getting a bit of traction because sites like CineD and NewShooter are covering it because of that headline of 24 stops of dynamic range. Sounds just, for anyone who, really pays attention to the dynamic range of their cameras, they're going to look at that and go, oh, wow, what is this? Tell me more. Canon haven't said that this is a sensor that is designed for our world.
No.
All Canon have said it's a small sensor and it's got 24 stops of dynamic range. Canon makes sensors for a lot of things. And I think this is a sensor that's going to end up in military cameras and security cameras,
make perfect
that
sense.
kind of stuff. This is a surveillance sensor. It must be.
Yeah.
And that's why you want the 24 stops of dynamic range, so you can see right into the shadows, right into the highlights
that's
of the sky, and if an explosion goes off or whatever, you can see as much information as possible rather than the camera whiting out and just completely being overexposed.
Makes sense.
But the trade-off of that is that it's gonna, I imagine, look pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get your hopes up.
Yeah, it's got to. Do you think, a question off the back of that question is there realm for a sensor like that in the cinematic photo world?
The worry for you, Luke, is that we won't need any lights.
Oh no, Luke's out of a job instantly after just joining us.
Keep it to military.
I mean, is there a potential? It'd be interesting to get a proper DOP's opinion on that. I mean, around the realm of dynamic range, we're talking from independent tests. Most cameras we're using at the moment are living between 10 and 12 stops. Yeah. The Arri Alexa's got up to the 13, and their new Alexa 35 has just transformed things and sort of blown everyone's
17,
mind.
Yeah.
They're saying 17, probably more like 15, 16, depending on who's testing it and how they're testing it. But no matter how you're testing it, everyone's agreed it's remarkable and, head and shoulders above what everyone else is doing.
Oh, yeah.
But to leap from, let's say it's 16, to leap from that to plus 20, like that's...
When you think of stop, it's an exponential chart.
Of course.
So,
every stop is hugely...
It would be a giant amount more dynamic range. And is that useful in cinema? I don't know it's useful. I think at that point it stops looking like...
humans, isn't it?
Yeah.
21.
It stops looking like reality.
So we're talking a human with some sunglasses on.
Yeah.
And
you're talking weird HDR effects.
Yeah.
Like you get in photography where they frame blend things and it looks cool, but it looks artificial.
Yep.
You're starting to get into that realm, and
we'll be faking it all in Unreal Engine by then. I'm sure we won't
I'm not
need.
sure that's what people want. Well, yeah, that's the thing. We've had a lighting question come in.
Oh, fantastic.
Jim has said, are you planning to stock the Lupo Ultra panel, and how does the Lupo Super panel compare to the Astras? Have you ever used any of the Lupo stuff?
No, I've not used them personally, but I'm very aware of what they do. I think from an engineering perspective, they make some incredible stuff. In terms of our stocking as ProAV, the fortunate thing for us is we have access to all the brands. You know, we're not kind of exclusive to anybody. So, you know, from a customer's perspective, asking us, do we plan to stock it? If you don't see it on our website, get in contact with us and we can certainly kind of, you know, make it happen for you. But as lights I've not tested, I really would like to refrain from any comments in terms of like comparison. What I could say is from a Lupo light perspective, I know they engineer really good lights, and from what I understand, you know, they're up there with the best of them. So yeah, so apologies I can't answer directly, but what I will do is, as we get hold of these products and we can do more direct comparisons, I'll be able to say, okay, in answer to that question, based on first-hand experience, this is how they relate. So, yeah.
So I've used the Super panels a fair bit, and a few of the other Lupo ones. I haven't used their new Ultra panel line, their brand new ones. I've always thought they held up really well compared to the Astras.
Yeah.
I mean, the Astras, they are a bit cheaper than the Astras.
Yeah.
I think the build quality is just as good. I mean, both are a little plasticky, but
Of course.
the Astras are a little plasticky.
Yeah.
Lupo really know how to chuck out lights. Like
Yeah.
the lenses that they're putting in front of their chips are powerful.
That's what I was saying. From the engineering perspective, is like when I go into, you know, reading detail about them or understanding what they're doing from a photometric perspective, they always seem to be, you know, really kind of pushing it rather than sort of sitting in a middle tier. They always seem to be kind of like edging slightly. So, so yeah, I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it. It's great that you have, because you can give an honest opinion. So yeah, we appreciate that.
Lupos are great. I mean, it depends a little bit on what you want your LED panel to be doing.
Yeah.
You know, if you want it to be, and they do make soft panels, but I don't know, if you're going for soft panels, is Lupo the brand? Lupo is the ones that you pick for the big punchy hard lights. And you know, if you're wanting an LED panel to chuck through a reflector or bounce off something, they're brilliant. They're really, really good. So in terms of the Astro lineup, it would compete with the 6x really.
Okay. Well, hopefully that answered hopefully you was able to answer that question better than I did, so appreciate it.
There we go. Video editor bloke says he likes the look of the Acsoon Seemo. I agree. A use I see being good to me is a cheap way of recording Zoom/team bits when shooting conferences, but it's a product that's totally reliant on an app. And I wonder if this becomes a future trend for kit generally. What happens if the company isn't around anymore? Does that mean we could be left with products that are suddenly unusable? That's a really interesting question, because we see this a lot in the lighting world. Every light manufacturer's got an app nowadays to control it.
Yeah, and the problem with that, particularly at the entry point to the market, is most of those apps are driven by Bluetooth. So you need a proprietary app for each of those to run, and that becomes complicated on a set with multiple lights. So that's why you would look at things like CRMX or wireless DMX and stuff to unify that communications protocol. So yeah, you see a lot of apps come in. You may, you know, jump on board with a new brand. They've created an app. Next thing you know, you've got 5 different apps to run 5 different lights, which just becomes untenable, particularly if you're a one-man band or a small production. So yeah, you do see these things pop up and then slowly disappear. And I think that's the risk with anyone that adopts technology early doors. Is, you know, is it going to maintain its grip, and is it going to become a technology that's consistently used? So yeah, I think if you early adopt, you're always at risk of kind of you know, sort of dissipating as that trend doesn't catch
and with
on.
the Seemo, I mean, actually, relative to other equipment, it's quite a low price bit of kit, isn't it? The first thing that's going to make it go out of there's a version for USB-C and a version for Lightning. And the Lightning connectors certainly in Europe
having to change, isn't it?
Yeah. So that might invalidate it before we get the app going.
I mean, it is the Seemo particularly, which I'm a huge fan of. I really like the Seemo. It is a consumer piece of kit. You know, it's to turn your smartphone into a monitor. Yeah. If you want a future-proofed monitoring solution, you don't buy the Seemo. Yeah. You buy a monitor, you buy small HD, you buy a Swift monitor, you buy a...
Because Sony put some work into this with their Xperia range, didn't they? There was that exclusive phone that could be used directly as a monitor with their exclusive range of cameras. So there's an example of it already working, but the problem with that is it's proprietary. You can only use it if you're a Sony shooter, whereas with this, opens up the door, you know, because it's more based on your handset, you know, rather than the camera spec. So,
But yeah, what happens when iOS moves on and their app doesn't, because they've got a new product which they support instead? It's a risk you take with every iOS or every app-based bit of technology.
It is, and we've seen that actually this week with we found one of the old Sennheiser memory mics, which I don't know if either of you remember. They Sennheiser sold them as these like clip-on, bit like a Rode Wireless Go, that clips onto you and it records onto the device, and then you use an iPhone app to chuck the audio across over Bluetooth after you've filmed. Great little piece of kit. Oh, there we go. So it's got the one I'm talking about right there. There we go.
We make it a prize.
Well, we were going to, and then realised that they've stopped selling it. And of course, that means that how long is that app going to be? Yeah. And I don't want to. You know, we've stopped selling that product. Sennheiser stopped selling that product. It will work on. It might not even work on the latest iOSs. It will stop working on the last versions. And so, without that product actually doesn't do very much. You know, and so it is an important question. I think you've just got to be careful with what you buy. And I'm not saying don't buy anything that does that. Just know that it will stop being. It won't have a lifespan of forever.
I think all of us in this space are excited by new technologies. I particularly am, and have jumped on stuff. You know, I remember one of the first 4K Sony TVs. I had one of the first 4K Sony TVs. I was working for Sony at the time, and I was privileged of having it. I couldn't watch any 4K content, but I had a 4K TV, and I had to get a separate, you know, computer console to drive 4K content into it. No HDMI cable could carry. But I was super excited to have a 4K TV. You know, and I think we're all excited by new technology. So I think you should. You know, if you're excited by it, by all means jump on it and utilize it, but just be cautious. New technologies don't always work out and kind of stand the test of time. So
absolutely, and you know, you're trying to fit a smartphone into a professional workflow. Yeah, and a smartphone is always going to be a smartphone. They're not a professional tool. They're an industry that moves very quickly. Yeah. You know, they are updated every single year with new things, and so fast forward 5 years, pretty much anything to do with smartphones,
they'll have
it's going to be outdated.
Dynamic range of 24 stops.
And we'll all be out of a job.
Well, on the topic of phones on set, and hopefully that answers the question. Like, you know, from a lighting perspective, in some of the productions you go on to, if you sign NDAs and stuff like that, you know, mobile phones out on set are not an option. They're just not an option. You can't have your mobile phone. It's a total blackout. You know, so you know, then pulling out a mobile phone to use as screen to do other stuff, it's just non-optional. So I think, you know, some of those features, as you progress in your career and go higher and higher up into bigger scale production, some of those are just not tenable because, you know, the limitations in the production. So it's worth keeping that in mind.
Absolutely. And on the lighting front as well, you know, if you do all your light around Sidus Link, for example, you know, sure, on some productions that's going to work brilliantly, and on some you're going to get there
just not
and
an
realise,
option.
I can't do that at all.
Just one more point about the Seemo. I think obviously really, really good for just being a quick monitor, but being able to power it. I mean, sometimes if your phone's running low and you've already got your connection in there for your actually feed out, you might have an issue with that, and also with storage on your phone as well. So I think as just the on-camera monitor, perfect for quickly having in your bag. But if you want it to record that Teams meeting like that, like our viewer said, I think you probably want to, like you said, Carl, look for something dedicated, like a Ninja or something like that.
I mean, this all sounds maybe a little bit downbeat on the Seemo. Maybe let's just close that conversation with some positivity, because I really like the Seemo, and I know Nathaniel, we've had lots of chats about the Seemo as well. You really like it, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually bought one. I bought one.
There we go. How are you using it?
I am using it. First off, I was using it on my phone as just a monitor on my 6K Pro, because I can't see myself because the screen doesn't flip out. So I've been facing the monitor to see myself. But then now I've actually been feeding it into my iPad onto a stand next to where I'm filming interviews, so that my client can see. And it's just bigger, it's nicer to have rather than kind of peering over my camera screen. So really been enjoying it. So
you are literally using it as a entry-level version of having a production monitor?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm just making sure my iPad's charged at the beginning of the shoot. And then, it's been working really flawlessly for me.
Excellent. There we go. I think it's a great piece of kit. You've had a bit of a play with it.
I
as well,
have.
right?
I love it. Yeah, I want one. But I'm not willing to put my hand in my pocket because I can borrow our demo one. As I sign out the demo equipment, there are some advantages.
Right, going back to Panasonic, Colin has said, Panasonic need a camera roadmap. Will there be a SH2? S1H Mark II, I guess he means. Will it have internal NDs? What about Neva 2? I want to buy a S5 Mark II X, but I only want to invest in a company that has a real cinema line, right? So there's a couple of, there's 2 points there. One is release a camera roadmap. Sure, it would be lovely. I don't think it's needed. Nobody does it.
It's been a long time since Eva as well. That sort of, I think the Lumix range, the full frame range, like the S1H, there may well be an S1H2. It was a fantastic camera. It still is a fantastic camera. And adding something like face detection autofocus to that would be a very strong contender.
I would love to see an Eva 2. I really, really would. I liked the Eva a lot. I'm worried that we will never see it. I think Panasonic.
There's been a bit of a surrender to Canon and to Sony on that.
Yeah,
sort of
they
type
can
of
only
cinema
fight
camera.
so many battles at once, really, can't they? Let's be honest. They haven't been setting the world alight in terms of camera sales, and so are they going to try and fight every single battle, or are they going to pick their battles?
Well, they've been doing so well on the PTZ front.
There are some areas they're leading.
By far the industry
Absolutely.
leader in the sort of high-end PTZ cameras. So
Definitely they are. And I think now in that entry-level hybrid, I think they are on track to be another industry leader. I think for hybrid shooters, that S5 Mark II is
but a
really
camera
cool.
roadmap, we're not going to see that.
No, I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a higher end stills mirrorless camera, the S1H Mark II equivalent from them. But whether we're going to see a cinema camera, I would love to, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
I think on the note of like roadmaps, the industry is far more competitive than it used to be. I think you just can't be giving up that sort of insight into what you're doing next when the industry is so competitive. Like from a manufacturer's perspective, letting everybody know what you've got coming a year in advance just kind of gives your opposition the opportunity to develop, counter products as fast as you plan on launching them. So,
actually, the more, because we talk to a lot of companies behind the scenes with what their roadmaps look like, and boy do they change a lot. And
you probably don't remember 3D, you two. Was that a cul-de-sac? Oh, wow.
It changes and it needs to change, and if the customers are aware of that change, I think that is bad for the end user, not positive for the end user. Nobody likes to be basing their decisions and purchasing decisions around a future that they know about that is going to change, and then it's going to disrupt everything. God, what if
Agreed.
I think the way it is at the moment has to be.
Agreed.
Right, should we pause on some of the questions and talk about some of our areas? Because Luke, you've got a couple of new lights which you wanted to caught your eye.
That's okay. So a subject that's close to my heart. So I think in terms of stuff that's going on in the lighting world, January's been relatively slow. Only a couple of key announcements that sort of I've caught attention of. I think the first one is Nanlite. Obviously, they've refreshed their Forza and the PavoTube C range. So the Forza is a range of cob single source point LEDs. They were launched.
Lighting us right now.
Yeah, lighting us right here. So launched back in 2018, or sort of 2019, they kind of entered the market. And the Forza range has done exceptionally well considering it was launched back at that period of time and is still competitive today, particularly the 500. Lots of counter products to the 300, but the 500 still sits in a realm of its own in terms of sheer lux output. But I think one of the things they were missing at that point in time was simply build quality and connectivity. The technologies weren't there, and the insight into knowing how they would be used wasn't there. So I think with this second generation of Forza, they really have improved the connectivity and also the build quality. So you're probably more likely to see these go into rental and be used kind of a bit more heavier production, which is exciting. And then they've updated their PavoTube C range. So the C, they have the 15C and and the 30C. They've now created a second generation to that, so the 15 and 30C Mark II. What they've effectively done is take away the gripes of the previous. So previously you could see the diodes. So there was no uniform beam on the light, which people would be frustrated with reflection and catch lights and whatnot. So they've updated that, and then all connected via Bluetooth. So you can use the new NanLink app, which is pretty exciting. So worth taking note of that if you are, you know, a NanLight user. And then the other thing that caught my attention was the Philex G3 color, which is pretty interesting. So, you know, a hard controllable light that you can cut and slash and do really creative things to is really important. You know, you use it to create texture in scenes and stuff, and this is a product from Philex that will allow you to do that as an inbuilt system. So
can I just say I don't know what cut and slash is. Well, I've got a guess, but I'm sure it's not right. In lighting terms, what is cut and slash?
If we were thinking about a cut of light, imagine sunlight beaming through a window with Venetian blinds, you know.
Yeah.
Think
so
about
a
sharp edge on light. You know, sometimes where you're lighting a scene, you might want to put a bit of light into a space, but because of the build of the room or the frame of the window, it's difficult to do.
And I'm a bit worried to ask about slash, but
so just a bit of slash of light, just a slash of light for a scene, or you know, a slash could also be used to come over somebody's shoulder to create a bit of scratch, and that's like creating separation and depth. But it's really hard to do that with big soft lights, so you need a controllable hard source that gives you that pinpoint accuracy, and that effectively is what this will do. So it's a 90 watt, it's called the G3 color. That was announced this month on the 13th of January, which is something I'm excited by, because I think this technology at the moment is modularized. You buy a lens, you buy a light, you bring them together. This is one complete system, and I think what you would get from that is much better control in terms of like the zooming in, the zooming out, and how that then sits on DMX and stuff. I just think it gives your operator kind of a lot more options. So that's something that's come in that I'm super excited by.
I imagine some people watching this might not have heard of Philex.
Yes.
Because they're a relatively niche brand in the lighting space, in the industry. What sort of productions would be using this?
So I think you could use them all the way through, you know, from sort of early point productions through to top end professional. But for me, in terms of it being a single, you know, compact unit that does everything, I would imagine the top end is where it's really going to be used, you know, stuck up high on a truss where you need a hard source of light that's controllable from down on the ground. You know, that's where you would probably use a product like this. So I'd say more towards the top end. But yeah, Philex, they make some fantastic kit. They're relatively new to the industry, but you know, the lighting industry is developing particularly the LED side of it, at an alarming rate, and there's lots of newcomers coming in. And I think out of some of the newcomers, these are definitely guys that have got the eye on the ball, and they've looked at where there's an opportunity. Because Lecos and stuff are kind of the go-to, or a bigger scale like a Source 4 and stuff. This gives you a lot of options in tight spaces. You can stack them, you know, have 3 or 4 of them. So I think it's they've seen an opportunity and created a product to fill that gap, which is interesting. So it's something to keep an eye on.
I certainly hear them being talked about more and more. Scout Design's come up with another lighting question. Does mixing lighting on set really affect the final colour result, or are they accurate enough now to not worry so much what with raw recording?
Mixing lights is...
We both side.
Yeah, again, the return to that answer very simply would be depends on the level of production you're working at. When you're talking the absolute top end, it's not questionable. You can't mix light. It has to be consistent, you know, to make the editor's job in post-production as easy as possible. You know, but when you're talking, you know, smaller one-man bands, you know, who might be shooting interviews using some Amaran, some Aperture, some Nanolite, at that level, you can do it and you can get away with it in post. But when you're talking like top-end cinema production, you know, you can't. And in terms of the answers to the question, are lights that good enough? It varies. You know, these chips come from different places. They all have different key attributes, and they will all be slightly different. Bear in mind as well, even if you stick to one brand, you know, their manufacturing run of, you know, 50,000 diodes might stop, and then they have to reproduce another 50,000 diodes. So even though you have the same light, there may be slight shifts between the green and magenta, even though it's exactly the same product. So I think it's really important that if light is really important to you, get yourself a good spectrometer, you know, and measure your lights, and then manage those slight adjustments between those lights, you know, with the magenta up, down, you know, manage it through that sense. But
that's a trick I learned. We've had a spectrometer here, obviously, to test light and evaluate light for a long time. But Actually using it in production is something that I've only recently sort of learned about.
Yeah.
But it works really nicely to sort of hold it on camera and on talent, point it at one light to see what the colour readings are, how much green, how much magenta's in it, then turn to another one that might be RGB tunable and dial it in to match.
Exactly.
Just add a bit more green to that, add a bit more green to that.
Totally agree. That would be the place to be. Adjust them. If you find that they don't all match equally, try and find a spot where they kind of get relative to each other as close as possible.
Yeah.
And then again, that will help. When you're shooting in log and stuff, you need it to be as easy to manage the data afterwards, as you're making those slight changes in post. If your colours are off that you've shot, that's going to be impacted drastically, and then it makes it more difficult for the post-production element. So, it's quite a varied answer to your question, but hopefully the segments in it answer that.
I mean, really, I guess the area where it's critical is lighting your talent skin.
Yeah.
If you're lighting with a key light on one side and fill light on the other, and one's colour balance is off on the other, that's going to obviously cause a lot of problems.
Correct.
As long as let's say you're in a situation like we are now, we've just got one key light on our skin. Yeah. Am I right in thinking the background, you can do what you want with? That's how I've always dealt with it, right?
Yeah, you can do it because we're all being lit by the same source from a face perspective. That's consistent. That's consistent. Yeah. Our backgrounds all change, so therefore you can offer elements of change within those backgrounds because they're all going to be different anyway. If we're all stood up against the same wall, then you want the same treatment against
a
the
white
same
background, like a cyc wall.
Exactly. Yeah. Try and do it in that way. But yeah, because we're all being lit by the same light, it makes sense to kind of get that right. And then what you can do within the camera, you've then got options to slightly tweak stuff within the camera as well, and that will help definitely.
And just thinking about the tip about colour matching with a spectrometer, amazing. Not everyone's going to have a spectrometer. They are still quite expensive pieces of kit. If you're trying to desperately afford that at £800 light, buying an £800 spectrometer is going to be difficult. One super basic trick that I've always used in that situation is to take a white wall, any white wall, point both of your lights at it one side and look at it on a camera and visually see what happens. Can you see a difference between those two lights? And if you can't, you're not going to see it necessarily on most average things.
Yeah, most like one-man kind of like operation. Exactly. I think that's a great way to give you a ballpark figure to try and and also as well, you can adapt your lighting. So say for instance you've got those two sources here. You're ideally going to light you with both of those sources. Adjust them. Stick one behind as a kicker or something. And modify it so it's slightly hard and it's falling on your clothes rather than your skin. Then you've used the same. You've still got two lights. You've still got a level of cinematicness, but it's not impacting the skin. The one that you feel has the better fidelity,
or bounce the better light onto the other side, and then you've got to fill that way.
So utilise them in that sense.
Cool. Alan has also said, have you guys tested the DJI Ronin 4D and 6K? After a loud launch, I've not heard that much about it. Now, this is a very interesting camera that we've been following very intently. We haven't tested it. We haven't tested it in earnest. I played with it at trade shows in smaller capacity. It was a bold move from DJI, that camera. It hasn't been that popular with customers, to be brutally honest, and I think that is for one very simple reason, which is cost versus how flexible it is. If they'd made that awesome system which you could have any camera on, like their other ones, but just a bit more high, well, I suppose it is just like their other products, isn't it? Or they had that amazing system which you could pop the camera off and use the camera, which was a good camera, in other areas. You could
and with other lenses, of course.
And with other lenses, all of that sort of area. I think that would have been a very different launch because there was some really cool tech in that camera. The gimbal was amazing. The transmission was amazing.
What happened with the RAW codecs? Was that resolved?
It got taken out. So just like Kinefinity cameras as well, it was part of what foul of the patent lawyers, unfortunately.
So when that camera was launched, I was at Nanlite and we were working with Peter Lindgren, who's a Swedish YouTuber, and has a fantastic channel. He was one of their launch ambassadors to help launch it, and luckily enough, I've become friends with him over the years and spoke openly and honestly about it. He was fortunate enough to be given one as part of the launch, and they used that as but he couldn't fault it. I remember talking to him about it after the launch, and he was one of the first people to have it, and I was like, oh my god, I need to know about this. I need to know more detail. So we sat and spoke about it, and he couldn't fault it.
Does he still use it?
Yeah, pretty much still uses it consistently. But I don't know whether he still uses it because he's got it and it's free and it's there and he might as well use it, or because it really solves all of his problems. Because I think a lot of the stuff he does in his studio is he's Sony A7s, A7 more, they're fixed, in the studio. But I think his out and about stuff is all shot on that camera, which is pretty interesting. Cool.
And talking about cameras, let's talk a bit about the Kinefinities. We need to mention these new Kinefinities, which have come out. So the Mavo Mark II range, the Mavo Super 35, Mavo LF Mark II. These are really interesting cameras, and the Edges were a fantastic camera, but again didn't sell amazingly well because they lived in a strange niche. They're very high-end cameras at a reasonable price point, which meant that their pool of customers
didn't have
small.
the kudos of
And it doesn't have the kudos. But from a design point of view, stunning cameras. Like, I think some of the best I've ever seen. The media, the internal electronic variable ND, frame rates, colours, all of that, just fantastic. They've now brought out the LF Mark II and, really interestingly, the 35 Mark II at a much, much lower price point.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to change things hugely for Kinefinity. I think that's the kind of price point that customers want a brand like Kinefinity to be sitting at. And they haven't got the NDs, which is a bit of a shame.
A sort of higher-end Blackmagic.
Higher-end Blackmagic, absolutely. I mean, everyone is crying out for a Blackmagic camera in a cube form factor with all these things in it. Cool. This is effectively that camera with a different badge on it. And they shoot in ProRes, not just any ProRes, but up to ProRes 444 XQ on the Super 35 version, which is only a £4,000 camera or around that price point. These are really powerful little machines. It's a new sensor in the 35, so we haven't seen it yet, so we don't really know a huge amount about what the image quality is going to be like. That's the main thing I'm really looking forward to.
Is there anything else at that price point that does the same?
Good question. No. There's competitors. Obviously, there's competitors. There's lots more all-purpose video cameras, I guess I would call them. I'm thinking about things like the FX6, C300, C70.
Z-Cam and...
Less Z-Cam. Those FX6, C70, those are owner-operator cameras that are documentary cameras. They've got all of the buttons on them for quick access, that kind of world. Z-Cams live in a weird straddle. They're half a systems camera with an Ethernet port and remote functionality, and they've been used on some fairly big productions because of that. You can control them over LAN. But also some people use them as entry-level cinema cameras, more the Blackmagic space.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you're using the Z-Cams from that point of view, then they compete a little bit with Kinefinity.
Got ya.
But Kine are unashamedly a cinema camera.
Okay.
They haven't tried to split between different markets. They've just gone, nope, we're a cinema camera.
Great, okay.
Which really I haven't seen since Blackmagic. Blackmagic are the other ones that do... Well, actually, even... I'm going to contradict myself immediately. I don't think Blackmagic do that anymore. I think Blackmagic are all half cinema cameras, half production cameras, with their integration with ATEM and all the rest of it. Blackmagic are increasingly becoming less of a cinema company and more of a live production company. So it would be interesting to see what they do next.
No, you're absolutely right. I think there is nothing quite like this. It is the 35mm. I mean, the closest thing would be a Komodo, really.
Komodo, definitely, definitely. Unashamedly a cinema camera, more expensive, not more expensive than the Edges.
But more flexible. The Kinefinity is much more flexible on frame rates
and lens mount is a huge one. The lens mount system on the Kines is fantastic. So the current Kines have always been able to use a bunch of adapters to go from their own Kine mount, which nobody uses other than to use the adapters, to go to EF, PL, a dummy E mount, or any of those sorts of lens mounts. But with the new one, they can even screw off that Kine mount and replace that with a active E mount with a tiny flange distance, so that you get full image stabilization and aperture control on E mount lenses. Or a PL mount that will screw directly onto the front, so that it's much more sturdy than the adapter way of doing it. And so, whereas the Komodo and even the Red V-Raptor are RF mount cameras, and you're not going to get around that. You can convert that to lots of things, and people make amazing adapters. Yeah. But it's always going to have an adapter on it unless you use RF glass.
Understood. Okay.
The Kines give you, it's super easy to make it EF, super easy to make it PL, super easy to make it E mount, and it's going to work well with all of those.
Their focus is making a good camera rather than locking you into a lens system and an ecosystem. It's like, here's a good camera, you can stick whatever glass you want on front of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, nice. It's a good USP to have.
Absolutely. And Richard, you wanted to talk a bit about some of the new PTZs?
Yeah, because I got 2 new toys to play with on my PTZ Table of Doom, and both really high-end cameras. So top of the market releases from Canon, the CRN 700, and from Panasonic, the AWUE 160. So they're different price points. We're talking £8,000 plus VAT for the Canon, and we're talking £12,000 for the Panasonic. But what the Panasonic has, which nothing else in the market has, are some really high-end broadcast features like SMPTE 2010. SMPTE 2010 video over Ethernet, a sort of high-end, it's the equivalent of NDI for broadcast establishments, video over IP, but very low latency, very high-end version of that, developed by SMPTE, so it's an industry standard, and that there is no other PTZ which has that format built in. They also have a live output of 120 frames a second, so great for sports events, where you've got not just that 20 times zoom, but 120 frames a second output, which it does over either HDMI as a simple output. I'm not sure how we'll utilise that yet. I haven't seen anything we can tap into that
Does
with.
That vary on resolution? Sorry to interrupt. Is that
It is only HD. The 120 frames a second is only HD, but this is a live output. So unlike a camera which will do 120 frames 4K recording, this is outputting it live, so you can then do a slow-mo replay afterwards.
Fantastic.
So
for
the
missing
SDI
piece of the
one,
puzzle there is an HDMI.
Yes, an HDMI capture
relay box.
Exactly. If there's some way of capturing 120 frames, I was having a little sniff around the internet, seeing if there was a games capture device which let you capture 120 frames a second to quickly record that high frame rate output and then play it back. That would be interesting because of course it will do this simultaneously to outputting at normal speed as well. But in order to use the SDI, the dual channel SDI 120 frames a second output, you will need some sort of server system like an EVS, which are not cheap bits of kit. So suddenly that £12,000, this is in a very different sort of higher end workflow scenario than you normally get in PTZ environments. This is very much a broadcast tool, and it fits very much with their Kairos production system as well, the 2110 and the that sort of high frame rate output. So really interesting camera. Another place the Panasonic excels is they've got a low pass filter to get rid of moire. I shouldn't have had that drink at lunchtime. To get rid of moire, to get rid of that sort of aliasing patterns you can get when you point the camera at things like a LED wall. Of course, with virtual production, this is becoming more and more common. So you actually want to knock off some of the sharpness of these cameras because they have got smaller sensors than cinema cameras. Although it's a 1-inch sensor in the 160. You want to lose a bit of the sharpness so you don't see the dot pitch of those LED walls for that virtual production. And increasingly, these are the sort of cameras being used in virtual production. So,
and the other example that you gave the other day that I thought was perfect for that camera was sports, because
Very
so
much.
many sports stadiums have got those LED screens around them as the advertising board.
Exactly, and you can watch this sort of. And the trouble with that sort of aliasing is it moves in the opposite direction, or it tends to move in the opposite direction to camera motion, which totally screws up any codec. So by the time you transmit it, if you're at a broadcast chain, you know, the MPEG-4 or even H.265 is not expecting stuff to be simultaneously moving left and right and up and down. Aliasing screws with compression and causes awful problems in terms of artifacts. So aliasing is the enemy of production. So yeah, but great for sports because of this great zoom range as well, a 20 times zoom range. Another clever thing the Pana 160 does is it allows you to have a couple of different outputs simultaneously. So as well as having the 4K 12 gig SDI, you can also have HD outputs from a secondary SDI output.
Really
so, and you can even pan and tilt that within the frame of 4K, so you almost have two cameras in one, which is a trick which the CRN 700 from Canon can do as well, but with a little less sophistication. In fact, the £8,000 Canon CRN 700, I think that's a great way of describing it. It's everything the Pana does. The Canon hasn't got quite the credentials and quite those high-end features which are packed into the UE160. However, it's not only £4,000 cheaper, but personally I prefer the image quality out of it.
I would second that. We put them side by side, and to me, from a sort of large sensor camera world, the Canon just looked head and shoulders better to me.
Yeah.
And
however, this, you know, maybe some of what we're seeing is the low pass filter on the 160 has actually knocked off that lovely sharpness in 4K. So the Canon really was punchy pictures, but they also look more contrasty. Eyes can play tricks on you. You know, if there's more sharpness, you can also perceive more contrast, and vice versa. So I really like the look of the CRN 700. And just to throw another thing into the mix, Canon have just released a video, I think it was on Friday last week, showing they've got an auto tracking system which will work with, first of all, the CRN 700 to give you this lovely ability to track people remotely. Now, we don't yet know for sure, although I've asked them, they don't know yet, whether this auto tracking is built into the actual camera firmware or whether you're going to need a powerful laptop to do it. I must admit, it looks to me like it's actually built into the camera firmware, but I'm not sure of that, because every other manufacturer does this in software. Every other high-end manufacturer does it in software, so you need a good laptop to run it. But so if they could build it into the camera, this would be a real advantage.
So I imagine you'd still control it from a laptop, but if we're talking about what is doing the processing power, bringing it into the camera is going to mean it's probably much more reliable.
Much more reliable, much more flexible as well. And we've been asking them about this because the Canons have had eye detection, face detection and eye detection. And it seems to be a small jump from being able to do face detection and eye detection to say, just frame it as well as focusing it. Yeah, come on, you can do that as well. You know, try. It's obviously female if it can multitask like that. So that's really interesting. So lovely pitch quality, but if you're a broadcaster, the subtlety of control, the subtlety of the features, you can tell that the Panasonic 160 is a next generation, evolution of PTZs for that more broadcast environment. The Canon's very much a creator's tool. It's a PTZ which is, more at the beginning of the journey in terms of features, but just beautiful picture quality.
Amazing.
People will stop
and
complaining
easy to
about
use.
it.
That's the other thing I've always liked about the Canons, and there are other Canons, is that from somebody who doesn't know about this world and this sort of PTZ world, and particularly networking, I don't have a clue about networking. I can use the Canons, whereas I really struggle with the Panasonics.
Menus are done from a video perspective.
Yeah.
The Panasonic also, the menu, the engineering detail and setup is so extreme. You're running to multiple pages.
I feel a little bit like I'm not clever enough to use it. If that makes sense. It's quite an intimidating experience.
It's a feeling I often have.
Same.
It's funny, it says that about you too.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it is interesting, but they are very different animals. I think it would be sort of fairer to compare the UE 150, where with the CRN 700. And again, I have to say, I think Canon have nailed it on image quality, but Panasonic have nailed it on high-end features. So
workflow.
Nice.
it's not going to be the same customer for both.
Interesting, super interesting. Nathaniel, what's caught your eye this month?
I've been interested by the new RS3 Mini from
the
DJI.
DJI, yes.
Yeah, the gimbal. Because I have the RS2 currently, to RS2 Pro, and the RS3 Pro came out towards the end of last year. But the RS3 Mini is 50% lighter than the new RS3 Pro, but has a payload of up to 4 kilograms, which I think is great. And it allows you to shoot vertically a bit easier. It's a little bit too heavy for my cameras, but if you have a lighter camera like a A7S III or EOS, like a R5, DJI have said it works with the G Master 24-70 2.8,
Which is a big lens.
Yeah, it is, and the RF 24-70 2.8 as well. So it's pretty capable. So that's definitely caught my eye for sure.
And so your camera that's too big is the pocket cameras, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't work with those?
It just about fits on the RS2 Pro, but it's a little bit of a struggle. But it does fit. It does fit.
For a camera that's called the pocket camera.
Is there, so quick question, obviously gimbals, like, is there any new features or new technology that it has that no gimbal previously has before, or is it just lighter with a heavier payload? Is there anything new in there?
So the RS3 Pro has this new locking feature where you can press a button and it kind of locks your gimbal. So with the RS2 that I have, you have to manually lock each section of the gimbal.
Cool, yeah.
So yeah, the RS3 Pro, you press the button and it just kind of locks your gimbal up, so it's not wobbling about when you're moving, which I think is a great feature.
And it's got this sort of Instagram mode for the young.
Portrait.
Yeah, it has a portrait mode, or a vertical mode, which it makes it much easier to actually change between vertical and horizontal, rather than taking it off, getting like an L plate or something. It's much better for that.
Which is a must when shooting content with a Blackmagic.
Yeah, most definitely. However, the RS3 Mini doesn't have that. It hasn't inherited the quick release feature from the RS3 Pro. So the Mini, basically, the main feature of the Mini is it's smaller, lighter, and can do vertically a bit easier.
Which, as someone who desperately needs to get to the gym, is a big selling point on a new gimbal. Definitely. Cool. Okay, I think that's a good place for it. Does anyone have anything else that they desperately feel that we haven't talked about before we wrap up?
I feel well covered. Yeah, I've learned a lot today from both of you guys, so it's been good.
Fantastic. So I think we call it there. So yeah, I think we're gonna aim to do this at the end of every month. We can't promise it'll be on the 31st like this one is. It will be, simply the logistics of getting us all in the same place at the same time. But it will definitely be in that last week of every single month. We'll sit down, we'll do these. So if you enjoyed this, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you come back next month, and we'll talk about what February brings. Exciting stuff.
Amazing.
Thanks for listening.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you all for watching. See you soon. Bye.
T-minus 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Welcome to the
Meet Aperture's first ever tube light, the MT Pro. 36 pixels in 1 foot, with CRMX in any color. Unleash your creativity with one or many. Leading the industry in pixel density, the MT Pro produces ultra-smooth chases and effects unmatched by any other light.
It's time to change the way we think about lighting. Introducing the new Anglerfish series from iFootage. Boasting cutting-edge color reproduction without sacrificing portability, the Anglerfish series makes cinematic lighting more accessible than ever. The Anglerfish series utilizes a bespoke construction and a new one-of-a-kind LED element to recreate the full spectrum of the sun with unbeaten accuracy. This unique LED element recreates the full daylight spectrum, but without the blue peak that's typically found in even the top studio lighting products.
My eye on the dance floor, eye on the door. Hey, a DJ, you like the way I sway? I gotta get it.
Lady, go!
1, 2, 3, 4. It's fast, yeah, you're gonna shut up. Battle your battles, you got a talent, how to the cure. If it's trash, yeah, you're gonna take it out. Handle it differently, got the magic, you got it for sure. You can see what's in your future. Alpha.
Meet Swit's latest RGBW panel innovations, the Van Gogh 70 and Van Gogh 100 LED panels. The Van Gogh series uses exclusive edge-mounted RGBW SMD LEDs, which results in an extremely thin 21mm LED panel that is fanless, making zero noise on set. The time division drive technology makes Van Gogh up to 60% brighter than its competitors in RGB mode. You can count on extreme color accuracy with a very high CRI and TLCI. Thinner, lighter, brighter, and quieter. These are the Van Gogh Ultra Slim RGBW panels by Swit.